Eric Burgess here with Music Marketing TV, and today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. As you've seen, it can sound pretty dang cool. It is dependent on this slider here. As I move it up, the LFO moves some controls, and it causes these really cool resonancy motions, that kind of stuff. So we're going to go after this today. So fundamentally, the way it works is there is a sine wave. It is being ring modulated against another sine wave. And then we run it through a boatload of effects. And there's a couple bits of modulation that move things automatically. So let's go. Let's take the effects off one at a time and just hear it. We'll get rid of the reverb first. Or the chorus. And drive. And compression. So that's the bass sound. If we move this up. Yeah, so kind of a nice sound, kind of an old school sound too. Good classic way of doing things. So let's go ahead, let's open up a new Twin 3 and go after this. So I'm just gonna grab a new one here. I'm gonna start off by changing it to the clean preset. And let's really quick take a look at the MIDI. So this is the MIDI I'll be using mostly as the input, just so I don't have to like keep playing things on the keyboard in front of me. So here it is. If you wanna copy it, you can. I'm going to take it out and put it in the new one. And let's open it up and go to full screen mode. So here we are. Right off the bat, we are greeted with a saw wave. We want it to be a sine wave. And so a sine wave is pretty nice. Just a little squiggly thing. Let's add another one. And when you add a second one, the option to ring modulate them appears. So we're going to click this. And now we can no longer control the volume of this. This is now officially ring modulating this oscillator. So right now, if we just play it without ring modulation, that's what it sounds like. And there could be some variation in the sync as we begin to use sync. So you could fix that with this. However, that's in the original. However, it's not going to make that big a difference down the line. So I'm not going to do it this time. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to ring modulate it. This is what it sounds like now. And we can control the ratio at which these things are ring modulated. So if you're unfamiliar, ring modulation is a form of amplitude modulation. Maybe one of these days I'll make a video that does a little bit of a deep dive into it. But we are going to just alter this by changing the tuning. That's the important thing you need to know. You can change how it sounds by changing the tuning. So I'm going to bring it down an entire octave. This is going to sound pretty nice. And you get that as a result. Now, since it is based on tuning, you can get some kind of cool results by moving things around. So we're going to mess with the tuning on actually the carrier, meaning this is the thing that we hear. This one's the modulator. Normally, we would kind of mess with this. We could get different sounds by changing this. And you can sort of like get those sort of effects. But we're going to actually go after the root tuning, the tuning of the main carrier oscillator. And we're going to move it around, and it'd be kind of cool to have a vibrato kind of a thing. So let's add on a LFO. And the LFO in free mode is exactly fine. And we are going to connect the LFO to control the tuning of oscillator 1. And we are going to dial it back to 0. And that's because I only want this on when a control, like a slider, is pushed up. So let's add a slider. And we are going to have this control the modulation. So when this is up, that's allowed to go up. So you see it's already like hooked up for us. Pretty nice. So at the max value, let's pick out a good region. We're going to actually keep it pretty slow. And we'll be tuning this more as we go, because we're going to give the LFO a second job. This LFO is also going to control the sync. So the sync, you can think of it as sort of squeezing more oscillations into one oscillation. And you can see it visually right here as we do this. See how it kind of tries to squeeze another one in there? So we're going to mess with that as well. And this is what's giving us that resonancy juicy bits. So we're going to also control this with an LFO. And likewise, we're going to have this be controlled by the slider. So now as you move the slider, they'll both move up, and we'll get these resonancy bits as the tuning moves around. We're going to have to adjust how much this is allowed to happen because it can get pretty out of hand pretty quickly. So let's dial back the LFO here a bit. And oh, it's already at 0. I don't know why I'm grabbing that. We're going to do that by controlling the frequency. And then what we could do to control how much this is allowed to move when we move this, we'll just control the depth this has. And you see how this moves as a result? So it's dark blue, which means that the LFO itself actually doesn't do anything. This darker color is a result of this slider. If we actually pull it up, a lighter blue shows up, and then the slider shows the additional range it can give or take away. See how it's darker there? So I'm going to set that at 0. That's partially why at the beginning I was a little bit confused there. I was like, why isn't it moving? It's like, oh yeah, that's why. So let's dial this back, give it a very small range. We don't want the pitch to move as much. See, now occasionally we'll get these like nice little squelchy bits. And we'll slow this down a little bit more, and we'll pick another region. Right now we're at the 0.3 hertz range. Somewhere around there seems to work out. And then let's look here. That's pretty good. Maybe make it a little bit less, perhaps. We could try out more. So you'll pick out regions here that work. Honestly, you could spend quite a while here. You could also move off of free to something that's synced, but I decided to go with the free mode. I think it just sort of being a little wild and showing up occasionally. It's kind of a cool effect. So we already have the main gist of the sound done, but there's a few ways we can sort of give it a little more width. The first one is if we come down to the poly menu, and let's change this to 10. So this means every time we play a note, it's going to generate 10 of that thing. So 10 of these will now be generated, but we have a limit of 10. Let's go ahead and set that to 20. So we can play at least 2 notes if we want to. And suddenly all of them doing that when they phase with each other, it sounds like really cool. We could control the spread here. Maybe we keep them more narrow, meaning in the stereo field, they come more out the center, and this will encourage the waves to phase a little more strongly. If you spread them out, the phasing effect isn't so pronounced. And this is where we might come in and sort of tune this up a little bit. We choose a faster frequency, maybe, or even slower. So that's pretty fine. And while we're here, let's go ahead, let's bring up the portamento and give it just a little bit of a glide between the notes. Okay, let's go for the filter now. So for the filter, I'm going to do 2 things. First thing is I'm going to bring in this really, really high, a high pass. So it's just going to cut out the low end here. Just going to take out the extreme lows. And keep in mind, as we move this around, this is also going to move around this high pass. So you may not want this down the chain. You may want to do this in post so that you exclude it if you intend to use the macro knob here, which we're going to use a little bit. So we may or may not keep this. Over here for the filter, let's set this lower. And let's give it a peak value, like whatever this is, the first one, 0.339 or whatever. Or I shouldn't say peak, I should say Q. You can do that by just scrolling your mouse wheel. There's like a menu somewhere, I'm positive, that you can just directly control it as well, but I'm used to just using the mouse wheel. So I go for this first sort of most gentle one, and there's a bunch of different ones in here. I'm gonna go for like tube or metal or something. And I'd like this to move with every note. So to do that, let's go ahead and add an envelope generator. And on the envelope generator, we'll set this to control the frequency. And so now this will move around every time we hit a note. We'll bring the sustain all the way down, and we'll just have this attack decay. So at the beginning of every note, we'll get like a whom kind of a sound. Like exactly like that. We'll slow this down. And we're going to make this less pronounced. We don't want such a crazy thing. We might bring it down just a smidge. that's pretty nice. And now we have this macro control. We can sort of move this shape around. And you can get some really neat effects like that. In fact, you could create some modulation stuff down here to automatically move that if you wanted to. But I think controlling it manually is kind of the way to go for that kind of a thing. Let's go with this toss on a verb. And there's actually some, if you click on the dots, some additional options. I didn't touch these, but just so you know, if you want to, darken it or whatever, you totally can. And let's come down to the drive. And on the drive, we're going to set this to pre. This way it happens before the reverb so that we don't send the reverb through this drive. And we'll dial this up and bring it in. Let's bring on the compressor. I just leave it all the way up. That's fine. And finally, the chorus. And we've made the sound. And it's kind of fun if you just hold a note. Just try to time it with how the sync moves. If we bring this down, bring it up. And away you go. You could do some soundscaping, create some cool effects. Go for a bass line, maybe make an atmospheric thing that starts out, and you go into something with you bring in some drum and bass or whatever. You got a lot of options, but it's a pretty cool sound, pretty straightforward one, and it can easily be drummed up to be a bit more wild. All you have to do is increase the frequency a little bit. And if you go into once you start going above 50, you start getting frequency modulation type stuff. Maybe we dial it back down. And you can do stuff like that. So it can be extremely musical. You just got to be clever with how you write your part. If you have any questions about this, feel free to let me know. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos. And have a blessed day.